Welcome, everyone. This session is called Getting Started with PowerShell TUIs. Now, one thing I want to mention here, I've been speaking at events like this for a long time. One thing you should keep in mind when you come to an event like this, don't expect to learn everything that there is in 45 minutes. That's just not going to happen. You should come to sessions hoping to say, hey, is this something that I want to learn more about? Or maybe by the time I'm going to go, yeah, that was interesting, but that's not on my agenda. And that's perfectly fine. So you should just come to see what is this thing all about, get some notes about where to go to follow up and learn more, but don't expect that these conference sessions are going to teach you anything in 45 minutes other than, oh, I need to start doing something else. I already have a list of a dozen things that I need to learn more about when I get back home. So that's what you should be focusing on. My name is Jeff Hicks. I am just an old PowerShell guy. Although actually I need to take a moment and think about back to the very first pre-PowerShell event at Red Rocks in Las Vegas. I don't think anyone here was at that event. It's amazing for me to think, if I could go back to talk to my old self, that in, I don't remember what year that was, it's like 13 years later, that there'd be PowerShell events literally all around the world. So that's really amazing for me. And I'm very happy to be a part of that. Anyway, so if you want to know more about me, the GitHub.io link will help you with that. All right, so let's get right to it. So Terminal User Interface, or TUIs. Some of you may have seen some of these things. This is now kind of like my new hot obsession in PowerShell. Instead of GUI-based stuff like WPF, we're going to be creating forms that will run in the console. And this works great if you're using Windows Terminal, although it will work in the legacy console, but you should all be terminal users by now. Now, there are some requirements, and this is where it gets a little tricky. There are a couple assemblies that you will need, at least as of today. And I'll show you where to get them and install them. Terminal.GUI, that's the main open source project that we're going to be using. And then there's another assembly called NStack. I am not a developer, but I know enough to kludge my way through. The nice thing about all of this stuff I'm going to show you is that it does run cross-platform. So you can build a TUI-based tool that will work in Linux, Mac, and Windows. It does run cross-platform, although I'm just focusing all on PowerShell 7, primarily because I want the cross-platform support. I'm using the latest version 1. Whatever it currently is of the Terminal.GUI stack. There is version 2 that is in development, and that will take away the requirement for NStack. So everything I'm going to show you now is good as of today, but maybe in 6 months it might have changed. Now you can experiment, or not even experiment, you can use these terminal tools right now. There is a Microsoft module that you can install, Microsoft.PowerShell.ConsoleGUITools, PowerShell 7 only. This will give you a single command called out console grid view, just like out grid view, except it runs in a terminal interface. It's for multiple selection, PowerShell 7 only. The downside is that the version that's in the module, that's in the gallery now, is using an outdated version of the Terminal.GUI assembly. Some of you may already be able to see where I'm going with this. You can use the command the same way you would use out grid view. Run get process, pipe to out grid view. Again, nice little display like that. You can select items, then the items get returned back to the pipeline. You can't really customize it too much other than using the filter in there. But this is a TUI, a terminal user interface that Microsoft built. You can go and install it now and use it right away. But the real fun is, hey, I want to make my own things. And that's what I want to show you here. So you may want to create, and I actually have an example later. I'll show you. I recreated this screenshot that I pulled from the Terminal.GUI GitHub repo. I want to build a cross-platform app. It will support mouse and keyboard input. You can create little tab paths. You can tab around so you can keep your hands, on the keyboard. You don't have to use a mouse, but you can click things. You can, again, this is kind of like WPF. Anyone created WPF-based scripts? All right, so if you've done that, conceptually, this will be no different. And we'll get to that when I get to the demos. There's clipboard support, some things that we're not going to get into. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview. Support for loops, timers, event handlers, lots of things that we can do with this. Again, conceptually, it's very similar to using WPF. So that's enough of the intro stuff. Let's just get right to the meat of the demo. So I'll leave this up for a second. All the demos I'm going to show you are up on GitHub. Everyone got that? Now let's see if this will. No, it won't. I have to stop the slideshow. All right, so some setup stuff. First off, let's show you out console grid view. So I already have the module installed, and I'm going to, let's run it here. So this is a plain PowerShell 7, no profile loaded. All right, so this will be nicer than the screenshot. So you can come through, you can select what you want, hit enter, and it writes those objects in the pipeline, just like out grid view does. So that's kind of handy. Now, if we want to do the TUI stuff that I want to show you, some requirements. Now, you may have to adjust your package source, and I'm just going to get some of the stuff that I want to show you doesn't necessarily work very well in VS Code. So just to get in the habit, I'm just going to be copying and pasting between VS Code and here. All right, so I've already set up the NuGet source. You'll need that. If you don't have that, I think I have the line here so that you can register that if you don't have that source. So I'm not going to run through every line. You've got this code you can go through and try yourself. You want to look for the Terminal.GUI package. Now it's a NuGet package, so you can use install package. And I should have splattered all of this. Be sure to skip the dependencies. Otherwise, you'll end up in a loop and you'll eventually get an error message that it can't find something, because we don't need that. Once you've installed it, that will install it in your system. So I've already installed it. So let's grab get package. So they're under C program files. There, I got p.source. So when I install the package, you just download this file that has a new package extension. That is nothing more than a zip file. Because what you want to do is you just want to expand that archive, and I'm just going to copy that to a temp directory. And this guy said, oh, I need to change this because I don't have dtemp on this computer. So my favorite VS Code I think that will work. So Terminal.GUI. So underneath here are going to be the packages. No, we don't want the services, sorry. The library. So this has the different versions of .NET, and within here, let's just recurse, are the different assemblies that we eventually will need to load, okay? So depending on what you're doing, like for example, I'm building a new module that's going to package a lot of my demonstrations. And so I'm going to load in the module, I'm going to take the appropriate .NET 7, or whatever one works with .NET 7 version here, which I think is a Net Standard 2.0, and I'm going to copy that into my module and then load that in the module. So we'll see here, and I've got some code here that copies all of that. So that's the terminal GUI piece. You also need the end stack piece. Now, if you have the PowerShell console GUI stuff installed, you kind of have that, but you can also follow the same process, install the endstack.core package, expand it, grab the DLL that you need and put it in the same directory where your Terminal.GUI assembly is, and then you can just load them. I'll show you all that when we get to that. All right, so that's real quickly on the requirements. Well, let's do the ubiquitous hello world example. I have some links here to the GitHub repo for Terminal.GUI where you can learn read all the documentation and everything on this. So let's look at hello world. Now, by default, don't run this in VS Code because you'll run into a key binding conflict unless you follow the notes here. I'm going to run all my demos in the console. So what I need to do is in a virgin system, I need to load the assemblies. Okay? So I have them in a directory that is under PS script root. You need to then initialize the Terminal.GUI.application. This is the first line you're going to have in any Terminal GUI script after you load the assemblies, okay? Because you need to do this before you can access any of the classes. Now, in my examples, I have several techniques of creating the objects. This is just using a very simple programmatic way of creating a new object, Terminal.GUI.window. And again, the documentation will go through and show you all of the classes. Like WPF, everything runs in kind of a, I hate to say the word container, but a layer. Let's call it layer. At the very top, you have a window. Then within that window, we're going to add our other controls like you do in WPF, buttons and checkboxes and text boxes and labels and all of that. These objects obviously have properties, so you can, once you create the object, you can just pipe to get member and see what the properties are, in addition to going and look at the documentation. So I'm just creating a new window, giving it a title, some text, and telling it to auto size. And then adding that top layer window to the application. I then run it, and this will be a blocking call. By default, Control Q is how you get out of the application. I'll show you in a bit how you can modify that if you want to. And then very importantly, when you're finished, run the shutdown command to clean up everything. So this is all in a PowerShell script file. Now let's run this here in PowerShell 7. All right, there we go. So that's a very basic what it looks like. Now, one thing to point out, the color schemes that you get might vary depending upon the color scheme you're using in Windows Terminal. So this is a different Windows Terminal, has a slightly different color scheme. And you can kind of see, well, not too bad. It is pretty much similar there. Some of the other things I do, it will be different. Now, then again, as I say, Control Q to break out of that. There is a bug right now, something going on. I don't know if it's with the assembly or with Windows Terminal, but you notice you get a little artifact left over at the bottom from when the terminal was presented. I think it's a Terminal.GUI thing, because I think I saw an issue on GitHub. It's just a cosmetic thing. You know, clear a screen and it's gone. All right, so let's get a little more here. Let's go to Hello World 2. And I'm not going to walk through every highlight the whole line. So here, again, because I wrote all these demos to be standalone, but I also wrote them in such a way that I might run them consecutively. So I need to still load or make sure the assemblies are loaded, but I don't want to get an error message saying that the assembly is already loaded. The other thing you're going to run into is that if you have loaded the older version of Terminal.GUI, like from Console Grid View, you'll get an error message. You have a conflict, right? Now, I'm very happy to find out there's going to be a session on how to avoid that, so I need to figure out how to avoid that, but that is one thing to keep in mind. So I'm basically loading or trying to load some DLLs, and if they already exist, I'm just going to ignore the error and just keep going. Now, the one thing I've done different in this demo, and what I do want to point out, is I want to change the quit key. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get this to work the right way, because the key has to be basically the ASCII key value. So the escape key has code 27. There are Terminal.GUI codes, key chords, that are supposed to work, and they probably work in compiled C# code, but I could not get them to work consistently in PowerShell, in VS Code. So I just went to the lowest common denominator, just give me the raw value. So 27, I typically just use 27 for the escape code. Everything else here is pretty much the same. Different syntax, though, for creating the object. So here I am implicitly creating a GUI window, and then I have basically splatting, if you will, all the properties for that object. So instead of creating it with new object and then object.title.text, I'm doing it all here in one thing. I'm also creating a button, positioning the button. Just like in WPF, I'm going to create an error handler. So I'm going to call the add_clicked method, and I'm going to call the request stop, which will tell the Terminal.GUI, hey, I want to shut down. I then have to add that button to the window, and then at the very end, add my window to the top main application, run it. It will run, and then once that request stop happens, then shutdown gets called. Now, I also put in, just to show you this, will also work with mouse, Alt-Q, or that's one more time, escape. Okay, so I gave myself some options there so I didn't get totally screwed up. And again, the unfortunate artifact. All right, so that's the hello world stuff. That's kind of boring. The TUI will write to the pipeline if you want it to. So this example, I'm finding basically a simple window and a title called Hello Jeff. And I have a text box here. And I believe, yeah, escape was still my escape key. So here's a tricky thing, and this is why I always document in my TUI definition what I want the escape key to be. Because whatever you define as the escape key, or whatever it detects as the escape key, it will always use. Because the escape key is a field in the object, and it's not something that you can change on the fly unless you change like I do in the script. So I always document the key. And then here's what that code looks like, very similar. So here I'm initializing the escape key using the actual numeric value of which is control Q. Instead of trying to get, because I should be able to use this control mask stuff, it doesn't. I can't get it to work consistently. So I figured out what the exact numeric value is that it's returns, and just use that numeric value. And you can see the same type of code that I'm using before. So I basically create the window. Just to review here, create the window, create the button handler, add the button to the window. I add my quit button, add the button to the window, add the window to the application, run it. And it's as simple as that. And to show you that this also works cross-platform, so there's Hello World. That looks a little bit different. This is an Ubuntu instance in WSL. Let's Hello World 2. So I change the escape key, and then let's do my sample. Now here you can see the color scheme can get in the way, so it may take a little trial and error. Changing the colors in these terminal GUIs is not necessarily a simple thing. You can create little message boxes as well. Let's do a quit. And then it wrote the response back to the pipeline. Let me do on time here. All right, so let's look a little closer at some of the elements that you might add. First up, frames. This is a piece of a demo that I repurposed or borrowed from Andrew Pla. And there's another way that you might create code. It's probably the cleaner way to do this. At the top of the script, I have the using namespace directive. So I'm saying using the Terminal.GUI namespace. That way down in my code, it can just be application. This I could probably change, and I should change to that. That way I don't have to include all of that. And let's change this one too. I'm tempting fate by changing my demo live midway through. I even saved it. So you can create different frames. So I can have my window, and then I can build a frame, and then I can add elements to the frame. Let's just show you what that looks like. So you can have multiple frames. You can size the frames the way that you want. You can give titles to the frames. This is just, all this is doing, just showing frames. I haven't added any buttons or drop downs or anything else to it. Just want you to see the frames. There's so much. You can create lists. Go away. I don't know why this won't stay down. I keep telling it, stay down. All right, so at the beginning of this script, I'm basically running PowerShell to get all the processes here on line 17 and creating a hash table and then creating a list object, line 19. and then adding each of the processes to the list object. I initialize my application, line 23, define my escape key, creating my window, creating a frame, creating a list view. I'm specifying the location, the X and Y, as to where I want. And this is like WPF, this is the tricky part. There'll be some trial and error to figure out, okay, where exactly do I want to position this? I can then set my source, which the reason I made this a list object, like on line 19, is because that then works very nicely as the source on line 44. Okay, it doesn't necessarily recognize an array. It needs to be technically a list object that you get in .NET. And then I've added a list handler that if I change a selected item in the list, and you see this when I get to the demo, it's going to change, it's going to get some information from the hash table that I created earlier and display all of that. And then I have a second frame that has process details, add the frames to the window to the application, run the application. Let's just look at this. So that ran very quickly. It got all the processes, populated the list. That's what's here in this frame. And then as I click, it's running the event handler to display the properties from the object that's in my basically internal hash table and displays it here in the other list, in the other frame. And I'm just hitting, because I've selected this frame, I'm just using the down arrow key or up arrow key. Oh, I don't have any actions associated with selecting anything. Come on. Yeah, I may have to fix that. I don't know why that doesn't. I've not had much luck getting scroll bars to work nicely with terminal GUIs. Menus. Basically showing you all the things that you can do, and then we'll put it all together here. So menus are a little trickier because there is the menu object, and then there are the items that go into the memory object. I'm sorry, not memory, menu object. This is where you need to read the documentation or kind of look at my examples here. So I'm creating a menu item called close, and I've got the underscore C for the type for the command accelerator, key accelerator. It's going to invoke, if I click it, the request stop method, and then I add that menu bar item. I'm sorry, I add that menu item to the menu bar. Oh, I'm sorry, take that back. I'm adding a new item called quit also to the menu bar. And I have an about string here. I'm adding another menu item called about that will display a message box that will show that here string. And another menu item called documentation that's going to invoke start process and open up the Terminal.GUI GitHub page. And then create my, oh, that's right. It's just where it gets confusing. Here, let's run this. Then we can go back and talk about it. All right, so here are my menus. So I have a menu called quit and a menu called help. Under quit is a menu bar item for closing, which should be here. Okay. So that's close, and that is under quit. And then I have about and documentation, which I put under new. So when I click the about, it invokes the message box and displays my little help string. And the escape gets out of that. And then documentation takes me to GitHub. We don't need to see that. So menus are kind of fun. If you're building a full-blown application, you kind of probably want to have menus. Doing on time here, 14 minutes. This is more of a proof of concept as opposed to an actual, anything totally useful. I have plans to flesh this out more. You can create progress bars. So I've got a couple different versions here, and the code will go through and show that. Where there is, you can either put it in a frame, like I have down in this one. You can color code as to what value you want, or if you want to have, why my mail is running. And I've also created over here a radio button selections that will go through and show you the different styles that you can create for the progress bar, so you can kind of see what they look like. And all of that code is listed here. I'm just basically flying through, trusting that you're going to go, if this interests you, you're going to grab all the code and try it yourself. Try to make it self-explanatory. And the last thing I want to show you in terms of just raw elements, there are ways that you can work with file dialog boxes. They're kind of built into the library. So there's an open dialog class that you can create that will allow you to open up basically a file picker, or in this case, a directory picker. So if I run let's just see if I can. Oh, actually, I don't think I didn't program this to do anything. I think if I quit. Oh, I'm supposed to actually pick a file. That's why. There we go. So I picked a file and opened it up in Notepad, and don't worry about being able to read that because that's not really the point. So you can include things like that in your script. So let's put this all together and let's look at a few more practical examples, more complete examples. Let's just run this and move with the code. So here's my TUI credential prompt. So again, this is a blocking prompt. You don't get your PowerShell prompt back. This is just like get credential. You put in the password. I configured the password box to mask it. And I configured this button to toggle between making it masked and unmasked, so I can view and double check the password. And then new creates the object. So obviously I would have assigned that to a variable, and then I could use that. So that code now, well, there's another mistake. I don't need that. So I will be updating the GitHub repo here when I'm done. So I'm creating the text fields. So here's the Terminal.GUI text field for the password. And this secret property is what I'm toggling with the button to be whether it's masked or not. So I create the buttons, add the buttons to the form or the window, add the window to the application, and run it. And then my last example, well, here, let's run it first, and then we'll take a look at it. Now, okay, I need to check my VM's running. All right. All right, so this is kind of a complete TUI example. Well, not even an example. This is a functional PowerShell tool that basically, as the title says, it's a service report. It defaults to the local computer, and the code creates the text field and then auto-populate and basically provides the default value with my computer name. I have a box over here for credentials. Now, I can already tell that the formatting and spacing is a little off, and that's because I have increased the size of my terminal window so it displays better for you. So the formatting is a little off there. So let's get all running processes, do get info, and now this displays it all in, yeah, and this is, there we go, all in a text file or a table that auto sizes. Now if I want to, let's do something. And let's do all. I did this right, if it actually changed. Come on. Oh, it's cool. I think I locked up. Well, the demo gods do not like me. It's fine. We will go here. I think I'll just stick to the local machine because I wanted to show you, here are my menus. So I have an option to, clear the form. Oh yeah, I got time. Let's screw this up again. I should add my little button to show the password. It may not like my VM setup here. Oh, I didn't even talk about the status bar at the bottom. No one asked about that, so I guess it must not be that important. There are ways, it's a totally different object, so you can then add elements to that, and I've got code, so I'm failing to get to SRV1. So notice down there it says ready, and the code in the script see it's changing the status bar, giving me some feedback. So at least I know it's trying to do something. And I don't think that's going to work. It worked at home. It worked on... okay. So I think I have code in there that displays an error message. And again, because I have zoomed in my size, I don't get to see the message displayed completely well. But clear form. One more thing here. Yeah. Well, yeah, there is error hand. So the question is, what happens if I put in the wrong password? I do have in here, there is some error handling and just displays the error to that. I don't really have, because I'm calling getSim instance. So I don't have too much integration other than detecting if there's an error, and if there is, displaying the message box. That's. I'm sorry? Right. If there is an error, I'm trying to display it. Unfortunately, because I think I've zoomed in, you can't see all the error message. It's not displaying as nicely as it normally does. But I also have options here. So once you could get that, also then say, hey, I want to export it to a CSV or JSON file. And then it would prompt up the file dialog to have me put in the location where I want to save it and all of that. And when I'm all done, I have my little reminder down here. This is using the escape key to take me right back. So let me go back to the slides real quickly, because I do have a few other things I guess I should show. All right, some resources here. So again, these are just refreshing your memory about the GitHub site for the Terminal.GUI application or the assembly. And from there, you can get to all the other documentation. Adam Driscoll has a TUI designer. It's a PowerShell module that you can install that allows you to use, and it's based on a TUI, that allows you to basically create the form and drag and drop the controls that you want and then generate the code that you want. You can also take a look at that. I included the link. And this UPC code, I think, takes you to the GitHub place, not the repo place with the examples. But we've got less than 2 minutes. Any other questions? Does anyone look like something you want to try or you want to run away from? All right. Questions? Yeah. Yes. So the questions are some of the features available in 5.0. So in Windows PowerShell 5.1, yes, you can use the Terminal.GUI. You just need to load the appropriate version of the assembly for the version of .NET that's in that, which I think is the .NET 4.7.2. So I'm using the version of the assembly that I know runs in PowerShell 7. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which version runs in Windows PowerShell. But if you download the package, one of those libraries will work in Windows PowerShell. And then you can do it. So if you want to make something truly cross-platform or cross-version, in your module, you would just need to have some code that would detect what version of PowerShell you're running and then load the appropriate assembly. That would be the way you get around that. But yes, it should work. Yeah. I don't know why things change color-wise. I think that may be a Windows Terminal thing, because there are ways that Windows Terminal displays things based upon the terminal color scheme that you use, plus PS readline colors. And so it's kind of and then Terminal GUI has its own way of interpreting what is red, for example. So it's going to pull that from the underlying hosting application. So I try not to do too much with color because that's just going to raise all sorts of issues, but that is definitely a challenge. Yeah. Does it work in a PS session over WinRM? Well, let's find out. So let's, here, this ought to work. Because this is, oh, I got the wrong screen. Yeah. Thank you. And I've got a minute. I don't think it does. Because, yeah, in fact, I'm almost certain it doesn't. I'll test it later, because Adam Driscoll also has another module called PS Edit, which is a TUI editor that you can run. Now, it's still really, alpha stage, but you can install that from the PowerShell gallery called PS Edit. He needs to change the name. But there's some questions about getting that to work over terminal session, because then you could have a GUI or TUI editor editing a file on a remote machine. Right, and that's why I don't think this stuff works yet. Now, it's possible that the new stuff in version 2 will. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm here through the end of the day Wednesday. I'm flying home on Thursday, so I'm happy to talk with you guys about anything that you want. And I think I'm over my time, so thank you very much.